I survived the flood in Fairbanks. I survived the storm on Cook Inlet. I survived an airplane crash out in the wilderness. And then one Good Friday, our choirs were getting ready to have a great big Easter musicale on Good Friday night in the church. And I was supposed to be the narrator on that thing. So I said, well, I'll look real formal. Put on my black suit and my black tie. I had one pair of shoes, black shoes. Of course, you know, everybody knows I've worn boots all the time. And I got took a bath and shaved and put on my suit and my black shoes. Had to have them on 5 minutes till the earth began to shake. And that's when the great Alaska earthquake came. It tore up so much stuff around here. And it shook. And our old upright piano began to dance out across the floor. I looked out the window, and my automobile was jumping up and down across the streets. The trees were leaning over, and the telephone posts like that, and then snapping back. And the ground was rolling, and you could hear things cracking. And my family was home. The kids were home from school. We just stayed in the house until the earthquake was over, and we had things fall out of the shelves, and dishes break and vases break and things like that, but the house wasn't really damaged. Not anything. I ran down the basement. The hot water heater had fallen over against the wall, but it wasn't leaning very far, just about like that because it was close to the wall. The pipes going to it and from it, those copper pipes, and instead of breaking, they just bent. So that was the only problem we had, except electricity was off, the gas was off, didn't have any heat, didn't have any electricity, didn't have any water. All those things had broken. When I saw everything was okay around the house, I jumped in my car. I went down to the church to see how the church was. Well, lo and behold, the church was okay. And right across the street from the church was a J.C. Penney store, 5 stories high. And that thing was just a pile of rubble, almost totally. Merchandise and everything piled out on the streets. One lady was killed. A slab of that building fell off and smashed her car. She was in the car. And the church was okay. Of course, we didn't have any gas, we didn't have any water, didn't have any lights. But the people were coming in there from the downtown area where the earthquake was so bad. They were coming in there because it was a little warm, and it was a sound building. Well, another guy and I scrounged up a bunch of field stoves from the Army. He was an Army guy. And we scrounged up some field stoves from the Army. We put 5 or 6 of those up in the church auditorium. Out in the back of the church, some reason or the other, some way or the other, a 55-gallon drum of fuel oil, stove oil. And we got stove oil and fired those things up. It didn't warm up that big old auditorium too much, but it knocked the chill off enough to where people weren't cold in there. And we had, I don't know, 5 or 6 of those old stoves going full of bore till they were red hot, and people could get around them and stay warm. And we had a huge boiler down in the boiler room. We heat the building with hot water. And the boiler was a huge old gas-fired boiler. Well, it had lots of water in it. And I had a old Coleman stove that we used sometime out on hunting or fishing trips. And I went home and got my Coleman stove and set it up out in the foyer of the church. And went down in the kitchen and I got one of those big old coffee pots this high. Actually it heats by electricity, but I just took the electrical part. It just sets down in that electrical wheel, and I just set it on that Coleman stove, and I made a big pot of coffee. The J.C. Penney people were having their folks come into the church, and they were there checking them all, seeing if there's anybody left in the building. They were trying to get all of their people together in one bunch and in one place, check them off to see whether or not they'd lost any in the building. Fortunately, they hadn't. Now, after a while, some of Our Ladies and the Red Cross or Salvation Army or somebody and some of Our Ladies, they brought a bunch of sandwiches down to the church. We got a big old table that we used when we had potluck dinners and things, and put it there in the foyer of the church, and it's just piled full of sandwiches. And I kept that pot of coffee going all night long, and people all around the church, some of them laying down on the floor sleeping, some of them just sitting up praying. But we had a lot of people. Then, of course, right after the earthquake came, the military sent their folks into town. They were patrolling the streets so there wouldn't be any looting or anything like that, and they were helping the police department police the town. Well, they didn't have anything to eat, so the GIs would come into the church and they would get them a sandwich and a cup of coffee. And so we fed people all night long. But the next morning, there was devastation everywhere. And a lot of people didn't know what to do or where to go, and they just stayed in the church. And that was Saturday. It was on a Saturday. And people staying there in the church, eating sandwiches, drinking coffee. Some of them began to drift off the telephones. Some of the telephones were working. Our telephone happened to be working, and they were calling their friends and giving places to stay. So some of them was drifting off, and some of them was drifting back in, and some of them finally went home after daylight came. They found out that their houses were all right, and they went home. But all day long we had a crowd of people, and they accepted. By noon Saturday, the military had brought in a big mess tent and some field kitchens, and they put that thing up on our parking lot so that the people around town that didn't have any place to go, nothing to eat, they could come there at that big mess tent and get them something to eat. And they had those big old field stoves, and their cooks, the people who usually operated them in field maneuvers. And they fed a lot of people out there about a couple of days. And we sheltered a lot of people in the church. And I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep Friday night. I didn't sleep all day Saturday. I didn't sleep Saturday night. We actually had church on Sunday. We had 111 people there, which was just a little crowd, of course, of that big old auditorium, but that many made it down there. A lot of folks that couldn't come, and then they had a lot of the town blocked off and a lot of the streets blocked off, and some of the streets were torn up so that they couldn't come. But we had 111 people in church on Easter Sunday morning, which was a pretty good crowd. Some of the churches couldn't have church at all because their buildings were in such bad shape, but it was warm enough in there. We had church on Easter Sunday morning.